Good morning, friends. So today we are picking up on page 15 to to read a little bit more about Peter Pan and Tink and Peter trying to find his shadow. And if you remember when we left off Monday, Peter was feeling very defeated because he could not get his shadow to stick to him. I don't know if you remember, he tried to use soap, not thinking about soap being slippery. So we left off with him being very upset. And we can see that here in paragraph 8, where it starts with the way his actions. We are continuing today with our focus being key details and summarizing for what's happening in our story. Paragraph 8, we start with Peter sobbing. So his actions really help us understand the way he's feeling from paragraph 7, when we had written the little note that he was defeated. His sobs woke Wendy, and I'm just going to highlight that word sobs because that's him crying. It's his action. And she sat up in bed. She was not alarmed to see a stranger crying on the nursery floor. She was only pleasantly interested. I'm going to highlight this also because we have been talking about how characters' actions and dialogue, the words they say, how they help us to know a little bit more about the character. So here I can kind of see that Wendy, I'm going to put a W for Wendy, she seems to be a little curious. "Boy," she said courteously, "why are you crying?" Peter could be exceedingly polite also. That's nice to know about Peter Pan. Another character trait we know about him, he can be polite. Also, having learned the grand manner at fairy ceremonies, and he rose and bowed to her beautifully. So that's another action of Peter's that lets us know that he's polite and he's kind. She was much pleased and bowed beautifully to him from the bed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Wendy, Moira, Angela, darling," she replied with some satisfaction. "What is your name?" I also like here that she replied with satisfaction, because that kind of tells us she's a little proud of her name. And this is a nice proud. This is not the proud that we learned about with the evil queen from Snow White, where she was being kind of boastful. This is the proud that's okay. Peter Pan. She was already sure that he must be Peter, but it did seem a comparatively short name. Is that all? Notice her name had 4 names in it. So for him just to say Peter, Peter Pan, she's kind of like, that's interesting. She was already, my fault, guys. "Yes," he said rather sharply. He felt for the first time that it was a shortish name. So this sentence here, "yes," he said rather sharply. The fact that his dialogue was said sharply helps us to understand, again, he felt for the first time it was a shortish name, that maybe he was actually not so pleased that he had a name that was only Peter Pan. Doesn't mean that he's upset, but it's kind of like, you're right, that's kind of short. Within this page, our key details would be that Peter is sobbing, he's sad, and honestly that they just discussed their names, and I think this is only a key detail because this is where they introduce themselves to each other. There's not a lot of key details on this page, not a lot of things we would include in our summary. "I am so sorry," said Wendy, Moira, Angela. "It doesn't matter," Peter gulped. This sentence here, we're learning a lot about our characters. And her being sorry and saying, "I'm sorry," it shows that she's very genuine and she's kind. She asked where he lived. "Second to the right," said Peter, "and then straight on till morning." What a funny address. Peter had a sinking feeling. For the first time, he felt that perhaps it was a funny address. "No, it isn't," he said. "I mean," Wendy said nicely, remembering that she was hostess. "Is that what they put on the letters?" So here she's talking about mail that, you would receive in your address. And so that's why she's like, that's interesting and funny. And a lot of what Wendy is saying to Peter is kind of making him feel a little bit like maybe things about me aren't normal. He wished she had not mentioned letters. Don't get any letters, he said contemptuously. What a big word. Contemptuously. I wonder what that word means. Contemptuously to me has a little bit of a negative connotation, that feeling that maybe it's kind of like he's sad. He's in contempt. He's kind of like, I don't get letters, do you? So I'm just going to put a little down arrow to let me know that I don't know exactly what that word means by what my context clues, but I can tell that he's kind of feeling sad. But your mother gets letters. Don't have a mother, he said. Not only had he no mother, but he had not the slightest desire to have one. He thought about them. That's very interesting to me. He doesn't have a mom, and he really doesn't have a desire to have one. It's kind of interesting, right? I love my mom, and I sure wouldn't want to have no mom. I wonder why he feels that way. He thought, here we go. He thought them very overrated persons. Wendy, however, felt at once that she was in the presence of a tragedy. So Wendy's like, like kind of what we said, right? Oh my gosh, you have no mother and you don't want a mother? Oh, Peter, no wonder you were crying, she said, and got out of bed and ran to him. I wasn't crying about mothers, he said rather indignantly. Oh, another big word. So now the tone. These words are really explaining a lot about Peter's tone and the way he's saying things. And so in this time he's like, indignantly means like, huh? No. I was crying because I can't get my shadow to stick on. Back to that shadow. Besides, I wasn't crying. It has come off? Yes. Then Wendy saw the shadow on the floor, looking so draggled. Such good words in this story, draggled. And she was frightfully sorry for Peter. How awful, she said, but she could not help smiling when she saw that he had been trying to stick it on with soap. So she kind of thought that was silly too. How exactly like a boy. Let's go back to this word draggled. The shadow was on the floor looking so draggled. Another one of those words where we don't have a lot of context clues to know exactly what that word means, but I'm thinking that that word sounds a little bit negative again. And I like to do this in my chest as a feeling. So it's kind of a negative feeling, and it kind of sounds like ragged and maybe run down and not in the best shape. Fortunately, she knew at once what to do. It must be sewn on, she said, just a little patronizing. And if someone says something patronizing, they're kind of making fun. So she's kind of like, you silly boy. What's sewn? He asked. Okay, so let's go back real quick and recap some of these key ideas. Again, learning that Peter has no mother is not necessarily key to the plot of the story. This just lets us know more about Peter Pan. So we're not going to identify anything here. I think the main key idea here is that they have an idea to sew on the shadow. So on this page, one of the key ideas is now they have a possible solution to the problem. Tomorrow we will read the next 2 pages, the rest of our story, to find out what happens. So this is a really great place to stop, to really kind of build a little bit of that the climax, right? We're kind of at that place where we're like, oh, what's going to happen? So as you're writing your fairy tales this week, think about your climax in your fairy tale. And think about, do you have a place like this in your story where if you stop, you leave your reader kind of hanging, going, well, what's going to happen? That is a beautiful example of a climax. So we have that place here where we're going to stop. I'd love for you to write down, what do you think would happen? So over here on the side, what do you think? Make a prediction. What do you think will happen? Sorry, I can't talk and write, guys. Do you think they'll sew on the shadow and it will stay? Do you think that's going to be another flop idea and something else might happen? But write your prediction down. And we'll see tomorrow what happens. But I really want you guys to think too about that climax as we're doing our story, because that's what we're going to kind of be building on next. And I really want you to ask yourself, does my story have a cliffhanger? Do I have a part where if I cut the rest of the story off, is the reader going, don't stop, I want to know what happens, okay? So in these last 2 pages, we just have a few key details that we would use to summarize our story. We would mention that, go back to page 15, we would mention that we meet Wendy, who is a polite and curious young lady. We would mention that, what did we say, the next one, that Wendy has presented a possible solution to Peter to sew on his shadow. And that's all that we would have to say to summarize these 3 pages. All right, my friends, we will see you later.